The cage sat in the middle of Main Street like a monument to fear itself. Iron bars thick as a man's wrist. Lock heavy enough to anchor a riverboat. Inside, the mountain man sat still as stone, his massive frame folded into the corner where shadows gathered deepest. The townspeople of Coyote Ridge gave it wide berth, crossing to the other side when they had to pass, whispering prayers or curses depending on their nature. Elias Cole hadn't spoken in 3 months, not since Sheriff Brennan dragged him down from the mountains. More dead than alive. Blood on his hands and madness in his eyes, or so they said. The judge couldn't prove murder, but couldn't prove innocence either. So they built the cage, let the sun and the stairs be his punishment until someone figured out what to do with him. The dust storm that brought Clara Bennett to town was the color of dried blood. She stepped off the stage with one carpet bag and a letter worn soft from reading. 23 years old, dressed in mourning black that had faded to the color of twilight. She looked like she'd traveled through hell and decided it wasn't worth the fuss of going around. The driver threw her trunk down with a grunt. "This Coyote Ridge?" she asked, though the crooked sign made it plain enough. "Such as it is." The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "You the mail-order bride?" "I am." "Thomas Garrett's place is 2 miles north, though between you and me, miss, I'd get back on this coach. That man ain't worth the leather of your shoes." Clara's smile was thin as wire. "I'll be the judge of that." The driver shrugged and cracked his whip. The stage lurched away in a cloud of dust, leaving Clara alone on the wooden walkway. The town stretched before her, one saloon, one general store, one church with a crooked cross, and there in the middle of it all, the cage. She saw him before she understood what she was seeing, a shape that didn't belong to the geometry of civilization. Too large, too still, like finding a bear in your parlor, if bears wore the remnants of cotton shirts and carried their wilderness in their bones. Don't get too close. Clara turned. A woman with brass-colored hair and too much rouge stood in the saloon doorway. "That's Elias Cole. Killed his whole family, they say, or maybe just watched them die. Either way, he's marked by the devil himself." "Why keep him caged?" "Sheriff says it's justice. I say it's entertainment for folks with nothing better to do." The woman's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. "You're the bride, aren't you? Come for Thomas Garrett?" "I am." "Honey, Thomas lit out 2 weeks ago. Took his horse, his savings, and the church donation box. Left nothing but debts and broken promises." The words landed like stones in still water. Clara stood very quiet, her hand finding the letter in her pocket. 3 months of correspondence, promises of land, a home, a new beginning. She'd sold everything, buried her mother, traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man who'd turned to smoke. "There's a boarding house on 2nd Street, the woman offered, not unkindly. "Mrs. Watson might have a room." Clara nodded, but didn't move. Her eyes had found the cage again. The mountain man hadn't stirred, but she felt his awareness like heat from a stove. He was watching her through the curtain of dark hair that hung past his shoulders. She walked toward the cage. Behind her, the saloon woman hissed a warning. Ahead, 2 men loading grain sacks stopped to stare. Clara kept walking. Her boots made hollow sounds on the packed earth. 20 feet, 10, 5. She stopped just outside the reach of those massive arms. Though he hadn't moved except to lift his head, his eyes were gray as winter sky. Scars marked his face, one through his left eyebrow, another along his jaw. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred too. The hands of a man who'd fought things that fought back. "You understood," Clara said quietly. "When she said Thomas was gone, you understood." He said nothing, but something shifted in those gray eyes. Recognition, maybe, or just the acknowledgement that she'd seen him as more than animal. Clara studied the lock on the cage. "How much?" Beg pardon?" Sheriff Brennan had emerged from his office, belly preceding him like a herald. "How much to buy his freedom?" The sheriff laughed. Ma'am, that ain't a horse for sale, that's a killer. Alleged killer. You said yourself you couldn't prove it. Clara pulled the wedding ring from her pocket. Gold band with 3 small diamonds. Her mother's and her grandmother's before that. This should more than cover any fines or fees. You're touched in the head. Perhaps, but I need a guide through the mountains, and he knows the trails. She held out the ring. Unless you plan to keep him caged forever like a circus animal. The sheriff's face reddened. Around them, a crowd had gathered, the barber, the minister's wife, cowboys in from the range, all watching this slip of a woman in faded black negotiate for a monster's freedom. If he kills you, then that's my problem, isn't it? The sheriff took the ring, weighing it in his palm. On your head be it. The key was the size of a pistol. It groaned in the lock like it resented being used. The door swung open on hinges that screamed for oil. Elias Cole didn't move. You're free, Clara said. Still nothing. She turned to the crowd. Could someone bring his belongings? Whatever was taken when he was arrested. Burned him, someone called out. Didn't want his curse spreading. Clara's jaw tightened. She walked to the general store, emerging minutes later with a bundle new shirt, coat, boots, hat, basic things. She set them by the cage door and stepped back. When you're ready, she said. She walked to her trunk, still sitting in the dust where the driver had dropped it, dragged it to the shade of the church steps, sat down, waited. The sun tracked across the sky. The crowd dispersed, disappointed by the lack of drama. Shadows grew long. Still, Elias Cole sat in his cage. Then, as the light turned golden, he moved, slow as a man waking from a long dream. He reached for the clothes, pulled them into the cage, changed with his back to the town, to her. When he emerged, he looked almost civilized. Almost. He stood there, 6.5 feet of silent question. Clara rose, dusting off her skirts. I need to get to Carson Valley. I heard there's work there. Seamstress work. You know the trails. A single nod. I can pay in food and company, not much else. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and started walking toward the livery stable. Clara followed. Behind them, the empty cage stood open like a mouth that had finally run out of things to say. The sun set fire to its bars, and for a moment it looked less like a prison and more like a doorway, something you could pass through to become someone else. The mountain man and the abandoned bride, walking into the dying light like they'd both agreed that forward was the only direction left that made any sense. Tomorrow they would start for the mountains. Tonight, they would pretend that strangers could save each other, that broken things could choose to be whole, that sometimes the cage you're escaping isn't made of iron at all. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and the promise of rain. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Elias Cole stopped walking, just for a moment, his head tilted slightly, listening. Then he continued on, carrying her trunk, and Clara understood that he'd heard something in that wild call that the rest of them had forgotten how to hear. She quickened her pace to walk beside him instead of behind. The town watched them go, the killer and the bride, the mountain and the morning dress, 2 kinds of darkness recognizing each other in the last light of day. The livery stables smelled of hay and horse sweat and old leather. The owner, a bent-backed man named Curtis, looked at them like they were apparitions. Need a wagon, Clara said, and supplies for the mountain crossing. Curtis's eyes darted to Elias, who stood silent by the door. Clara's trunk still balanced on his shoulder. I can pay. Clara pulled out a small purse. Not much, but fair. Ma'am, you understand what you're doing? That man there? Help me with my trunk. Now, about that wagon. The negotiation was brief. Clara traded her mother's pearl brooch for a rickety wagon, 2 mules that looked like they'd seen better decades. And basic supplies flour, salt pork, beans, coffee. Curtis threw in 2 moth-eaten blankets and a tarp, either from pity or guilt at the poor trade. Elias loaded the wagon without being asked. His movements were economical, precise. He tested the wheels, checked the axles, adjusted the harness on the mules, all without a word. The sun was setting by the time they were ready. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. Elias stood beside it, uncertain. "Well," she said, "unless you plan to walk to Carson Valley." He hauled himself up beside her, careful to leave space between them. Clara took the reins and clicked her tongue. The mules started forward with the enthusiasm of creatures who'd given up expecting much from life. They made camp 3 miles outside town, near a creek lined with cottonwoods. Elias built a fire while Clara unpacked what they'd need for the night. She heated beans and salt pork in a dented pan. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. "I should explain," Clara finally said, "about Thomas, about why I'm here." Elias kept his eyes on the fire. "My mother died 4 months ago. Consumption. I sold everything to pay the doctor bills, the house, the furniture, her jewelry except for that ring." She touched her empty pocket. "Thomas's advertisement seemed like Providence. A new start. Land of our own. Children, eventually." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I suppose I was desperate enough to believe in fairy tales." Elias shifted slightly, not quite looking at her, but listening. "And you?" Clara asked. "What fairy tale were you believing in?" For a long moment, only the fire spoke. Then Elias stood, walked to the wagon, and returned with a stick about as thick as his thumb. He pulled a knife from his boot. Curtis had returned it reluctantly and began to carve. Clara watched his hands work. Sure, steady movements, shavings curling away like tiny scrolls. Slowly, a shape emerged, a woman's face, rough but recognizable. Strong features, kind eyes. He held it out to her. Clara took it carefully. "Your wife." A nod. She was beautiful. He took the carving back, looked at it for a moment, then tossed it into the fire. The wood blackened, twisted, turned to ash. A small ceremony of letting go. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. Elias met her eyes then. Really met them. And Clara saw it all, the grief, the rage, the terrible weight of surviving when others hadn't. She recognized it because she carried it too, though hers was quieter, more accepting. He stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the firelight, stood guard there, looking out at the darkness. Clara banked the fire and prepared her bedroll. "You should sleep too." He shook his head. "We have a long way to go tomorrow." Still, he stood watching. Clara realized this was his way of earning his keep. Protection. Guard duty. The only currency he had left to trade. She lay down, pulling the thin blanket to her chin. The stars above were sharp as glass. "Elias." A grunt of acknowledgement. "Thank you for coming with me." No response, but his stance shifted slightly, became less rigid. A watchman settling in for the night. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the creek, the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant cry of a coyote, and, underneath it all, the quiet breathing of a man who'd forgotten how to be human but was trying to remember. Dawn came pale and cold. Clara woke to find coffee already made, the mules fed and watered, the wagon ready. Elias handed her a cup of coffee and a piece of hardtack. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" He shrugged and began breaking camp. They traveled in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher. The landscape changed from scrub brush to pine forest, the road becoming rougher, more treacherous. Twice they had to stop to clear fallen branches. Both times. Elias did the work without complaint, his strength making quick work of obstacles that would have defeated Clara alone. At midday, they met a group of riders coming down the mountain. Hard men with harder eyes. They looked at the wagon, at Clara, at Elias, Their leader, a man with a scar across his throat, smiled unpleasantly. Well, well, what have we here? Clara's hands tightened on the reins. Travelers, nothing more. Travelers with goods, maybe with money. We have nothing of value. The scarred man's eyes lingered on Clara. I wouldn't say that. Elias moved then, just a shift in position, but suddenly he was between Clara and the riders. He said nothing, did nothing overtly threatening, but something in his stillness, in the way he held himself, made the horses nervous. The scarred man's smile faded. He was looking at Elias now, really looking. Recognition dawned in his eyes, not of the man, but of the type. A killer, a man who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Cole, one of the other riders whispered. That's Elias Cole, the one they had caged. The atmosphere changed. The riders exchanged glances. We want no trouble, the scarred man said, but now he was talking to Elias, not Clara. Elias tilted his head slightly. The gesture was almost casual, but somehow it conveyed a world of potential violence. The riders wheeled their horses around and rode off without another word. Clara realized she'd been holding her breath. Would you have... Elias climbed back onto the wagon seat. The subject, apparently, was closed. They made better time after that, as if the mules sensed urgency. The road wound higher into the mountains. The air grew thin and cold. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. As the sun began to sink, they crested a ridge. Below them spread a valley, green and gold in the late light. A river wound through it like a silver ribbon. It's beautiful, Clara breathed. Elias made a sound that might have been agreement. They made camp on the ridge, protected from the wind by a stand of pines. Clara cooked their simple meal while Elias gathered firewood. When he returned, he had something else, a handful of small white flowers. He set them beside her, almost shyly. Thank you, Clara said, touched by the gesture. She picked up one of the flowers, noticed how its petals caught the firelight. My mother loved flowers, had a garden before she got sick. Roses, mostly, but wildflowers, too. She said they were honest, no pretense, just beauty for its own sake. Elias sat down across from her, closer than the night before. Progress, she thought. I buried her in her garden. Thought she'd like that. Clara's voice caught. I haven't talked about her, not to anyone. Elias reached across the fire, his scarred hand palm up. An invitation. Clara placed her hand in his. His skin was rough, warm, real. They sat that way for a moment, connected by touch and grief and the understanding that some losses carved you hollow but didn't kill you. And that was its own kind of cruelty. He squeezed gently, then let go. That night, when Clara lay down to sleep, Elias didn't stand guard at the edge of camp. He sat by the fire, close enough that she could hear his breathing, still watching, still protecting, but no longer holding himself apart. Elias, she said into the darkness, a questioning grunt. Tomorrow, when we reach the valley, what then? Silence, then. So quiet she almost missed it. A single word. His voice was rough from disuse, like a door opening on rusty hinges. Forward. Clara smiled and closed her eyes. Forward. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was enough. They were two broken people in a wagon held together by hope and habit, heading toward a valley that might or might not welcome them, but they were moving. Together. The ring she'd traded for his freedom had bought them both a second chance. Tomorrow they would descend into the valley, into whatever waited there. Tonight, they were just two souls around a fire, learning to trust the dangerous proposition that maybe, just maybe, they could save each other. The wind sang through the pines, and somewhere far off, that same wolf howled. This time, Elias howled back soft, almost inaudible, but Clara heard it, the sound of something wild remembering itself. She pulled the blanket tighter and let sleep take her, knowing that when she woke, he would still be there, watching, waiting, learning how to be human again, one small gesture at a time. The valley held them for 3 days while rain turned the trails to mud. They sheltered beneath a rock overhang. The wagon pulled close. Mules hobbled nearby. Elias had rigged the tarp to keep the worst of the weather off, and they sat watching water fall like a curtain across the world. Clara worked on mending a tear in her dress. Her fingers moved steadily, the needle catching firelight. Elias whittled, not carving anything specific, just letting his hands work while his mind wandered. "My husband was a tailor," Clara said suddenly, "before the war." Elias's hands stilled. Came back different, quieter. He'd sit for hours just staring at nothing. The doctors called it soldier's heart. She tied off a stitch. He died 2 years later. Simply stopped eating, stopped trying. Mother said he died of sadness. She looked at Elias. "Is that what happened to you? Did sadness nearly kill you?" He set down his whittling. For a long moment, the only sound was rain on stone. Then he pointed to his chest, made a gesture like something breaking apart. "Yes," Clara said softly. "That's how it feels." That night, she woke to find him adjusting the tarp where rain had started dripping through. He moved carefully, trying not to wake her, but she saw how he tested each knot, made sure the water would run off away from where she slept. "You don't have to take care of me," she said. He paused, silhouetted against the fire, then continued his work. "But thank you," she added. When the rain stopped on the 4th morning, the world smelled new. They descended into the valley proper, wheels sliding in the mud. Elias walking beside the wagon to help guide the mules through the worst spots. A trading post sat at the crossroads Murphy Station. According to the faded sign, they needed supplies. Clara counted their remaining money and sighed. "Wait here," she told Elias. But he followed her inside anyway. The trader, a whip-thin man named Josiah, eyed them suspiciously. "Don't get many folks this late in the season." "We need flour, coffee, and ammunition," Clara said. "Ammunition thought you were settlers." "The mountains have taught us caution." Josiah named his price. It was too high, but Clara had expected that. She began to negotiate, but Josiah's attention had shifted to Elias. "I know you. Saw you once up at Placerville. You won that bare-knuckle fight against Big Tom Garrett. Took him apart piece by piece." Clara tensed, but Josiah was grinning. "Made me $50 that day. Bet against the favorite." He looked at Clara. "This your man?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Then your money's no good here." Josiah started pulling supplies from shelves. "Man saves you $50. Least you can do is spot him some coffee and flour." They left with more than they'd hoped for, including a rifle and a box of cartridges Josiah insisted they take. "Mountains are full of things with teeth," he said. Back on the trail, Clara glanced at Elias. "Bare-knuckle fighting." He shrugged. "Is there anything else I should know? Were you also a bank robber? A marshal, a circus performer?" The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. They climbed higher into the mountains as the days shortened. Each night, their routine deepened. Elias would make camp while Clara cooked. They'd eat in companionable silence. Then Clara would talk about her mother, her childhood in Missouri, the books she'd read. Elias would whittle and listen, occasionally offering a nod or grunt of understanding. One evening, she was braiding her hair for sleep when Elias made a sound almost like clearing his throat. "May I?" His voice was still rough, unused. Clara turned, surprised. He held out his hand. She shifted so her back was to him, felt his fingers carefully take the braid from her hands. His touch was gentle, more so than she'd expected from hands that could apparently take apart Big Tom Garrett. He braided slowly, methodically. When he finished, instead of tying it off with a ribbon she offered, he pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden bead he'd carved, with a hole through the center. He threaded her hair through it, securing the braid. "Thank you," Clara whispered. Each night after that, he braided her hair. Each night, he added another beadsome plain, some with tiny designs carved into them. Stars, mountains, flowers. A story told in wood and hair. The 9th night out from Murphy's Station, they camped by a lake so still it held the stars like a mirror. Clara sat by the water's edge, feet bare, toes in the cold water. Elias approached, carrying something, a fishing pole improvised from a branch and some line he'd found somewhere. "Dinner?" he asked. "That would be wonderful." He settled beside her, cast the line. They sat quietly, watching the moon rise over the mountains. When a fish took the bait, Elias pulled it in with practiced ease, a good-sized trout, silver in the moonlight. As he cleaned it, Clara asked, "Did you fish with your wife?" His hands paused, then he nodded. "Tell me about her, if you can." Elias set the fish aside. He picked up a stick, drew in the dirt, a simple house, stick figures a man, a woman, a small child. He drew flames around the house, then crossed out the woman and child with savage strokes. "You tried to save them." He pointed to his scarred hands, then to the crossed-out figures, his failure written in damaged flesh. "It wasn't your fault." He looked at her then, eyes full of such pain that Clara's breath caught. "I know it feels like it was, but fire doesn't care how much you love someone. It just burns." She touched his scarred hand. "You didn't kill them. The fire did." He turned his hand over, laced his fingers through hers. They sat that way while the fish cooked, while the stars wheeled overhead, while the world turned toward dawn. That night, Elias didn't take his usual position by the fire. He lay down near Clara, not touching, but close enough that she could hear him breathing. She fell asleep to that rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. She woke once in the darkness. Elias was sitting up, tense, listening. Then she herded horses, passing on the trail above them. Many horses moving quietly. Elias's hand found hers in the darkness. "Stay still," the touch said. The horses passed. The danger, whatever it was, moved on. But Elias kept holding her hand until dawn, a guardian against more than just the physical threats of the mountains. In the morning, as Clara made coffee, she found herself humming, an old hymn her mother used to sing. She stopped, embarrassed, but Elias made a gesture continue. So she sang softly while they broke camp, while they traveled the winding mountain road. Sometimes Elias would hum along, wordless harmony that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. They were no longer strangers, not quite friends, not quite more, but something in between. Two damaged people learning to move through the world together, one careful step at a time. The beads in Clara's hair clicked softly when she moved, a percussion to their strange journey. Each one a day survived, a small beauty carved from plain wood, a promise that tomorrow they would continue. Forward, as Elias had said, always forward. The trail turned, and below them stretched another valley, and another beyond that. The world was vast and wild and waiting. Clara looked at Elias, found him looking back. "Ready?" she asked. He offered her his arm, a gesture so unexpected, so formal and old-fashioned, that she almost laughed. Instead, she took it, feeling the solid strength of him through the worn fabric of his shirt. They descended together into the next valley, the wagon creaking protest, the mules steady and sure. Behind them, their campfire smoke dissipated into the morning air. Ahead, the trail wound on through country that didn't care about their pain or their pasts. But they had coffee and flour and each other's company. They had small wooden beads and nighttime silences that said more than words. They had scars that were starting, just starting, to feel less like wounds and more like maps of survival. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces. Somewhere in the pines, a bird began to sing. The carved figures began appearing on the third week of their journey. Clara found the first one beside her coffee cup, a tiny bird, no bigger than her thumb, wings spread in flight. The detail was extraordinary, each feather etched with patience she hadn't known Elias possessed. "It's beautiful," she said. He ducked his head, uncomfortable with praise, and went to tend the mules. After that, she found them everywhere. A bear beside her bedroll, a running horse tucked into her supply bag, a woman spinning, carved with such tenderness that Clara's throat tightened. But it was the fourth week when she understood what he was really doing. They'd stopped early that day, the mules exhausted from a particularly steep climb. Elias had disappeared into the woods, returning with an armload of good carving wood pine, cedar, even a piece of cherry somehow found in this wilderness. He worked through the evening, completely absorbed. Clara watched his face in the firelight, saw how the concentration smoothed away the harsh lines, made him look younger, almost peaceful. When he finished, he held out his creation. It was a house, small, simple, but perfect in its proportions. A chimney with suggested smoke, windows with tiny shutters, a door standing open. Then he pulled out another carving from his pocket, an older one, edges worn smooth from handling. Another house, but this one damaged, the roof caved in, one wall broken. He set them side by side on the ground between them. "Before," he said, touching the broken house, then touching the whole one. "After," the question in his voice nearly broke her heart. "Yes," Clara said firmly. "After." He nodded and pulled out more carvings. These were different fragments of memory made solid. A child's toy horse, a wedding ring carved from pine, so realistic she could see where the gold would have worn thin from years of wear. A book with pages suggested by delicate knife strokes. "Your daughters?" Clara asked about the toy horse. A nod. His fingers traced the tiny saddle. "How old?" He held up 3 fingers. "Her name." "Sarah." The word came out cracked, bleeding. Clara wanted to comfort him, but sensed this needed to happen, this careful cataloging of loss. He was showing her his ghosts, one carved piece at a time. He pulled out another figure, a woman at a washboard. Another, the same woman reading by a window. The same woman laughing, head thrown back. All different moments, different angles, but unmistakably the same person. "Margaret," he whispered. "Your wife." He nodded, then did something that surprised her. He handed her the laughing woman. "Like you," he said. She laughed at small things, found joy where others didn't look. Clara held the carving carefully. "I'm not her, Elias." "No," he agreed. Then, softer. "But you laugh." That night, he showed her how to carve, sat beside her, his large hands guiding her smaller ones, teaching her to feel the wood's grain, to work with it rather than against it. "The wood knows what it wants to be," he said, the longest sentence she'd heard from him. "You just help it along." Clara's first attempt was a disaster, supposed to be a flower. It looked more like a crushed turnip, but Elias studied it seriously, then carved a few adjustments, and suddenly it wasn't quite so terrible. "You fixed it," she said. "No, just helped it find its way." "Like you're helping me," Clara thought but didn't say. As the days passed, the carvings grew more elaborate. Elias began creating scenes, a fragment of memory preserved in wood, a picnic by a river, a barn raising, a woman hanging laundry while a child played at her feet. But there were darker ones too. A man with a bottle, face turned away. The same man with the raised fists. A child hiding behind her mother's skirts. "Your father," Clara guessed. Elias nodded, jaw tight. "Is that why you took your family to the mountains?" Another nod. "You were protecting them." He carved savage strokes into a piece of wood, destroying whatever he'd been making. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Tried," he managed. Clara understood then. He'd run to the mountains to save his family from some threat his father, perhaps, or men his father owed. But the mountains had their own dangers. Fire didn't care about your good intentions. She found him the next morning sitting by the cold fire pit, surrounded by his carvings. He'd arranged them in a circle, the story of his life in wooden chapters. In the center, he'd placed the two houses, broken and whole. "It's time," he said. Clara knew what he meant. Time to let them go. Together, they built the fire back up. When it was burning strong, Elias picked up the first carving, his daughter's toy horse. "Wait," Clara said. She pulled out her mother's handkerchief, one of the few things she'd kept. "May I?" He nodded. She wrapped the little horse carefully in the linen. "So she's not alone." Elias's hand found hers, squeezed hard. One by one, he placed the carvings in the fire, each one a memory, a regret, a love letter to the dead. Clara watched them burn and understood this wasn't destruction, it was transformation, smoke rising like prayers, ash returning to earth. He saved Margaret for last, the laughing woman, head thrown back in joy. "She would have liked you," he said to Clara. "I would have liked her." He kissed the carving gently, then placed it in the flames. They sat together watching until the fire died to embers, until the sun was high and the day demanded attention. When Clara finally stood, she felt lighter somehow. Elias must have felt it too because he stood straighter, breathed deeper. That afternoon, as they traveled, he began to talk. Not much. Elias would never be a chattering man, but small observations. "Storm coming. Good water ahead. That tree's been struck by lightning." Each word was a victory, a small resurrection. That evening, he carved again, but differently. Instead of memory, he carved the present. Clara reading by firelight, the mules with their heads together, plotting mule conspiracies. The view from their campsite, mountains layered like promises into the distance. "Starting a new collection?" Clara asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he carved one more thing quickly, surely. When he finished, he pressed it into her hand. It was a heart, not anatomically correct, not stylized, but something in between, scarred in places, cracked, but whole, still beating. The carving seemed to suggest, still capable. "Elias," she began. "Not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just showing you what you've done." Clara turned the heart over in her hands. Such a small thing to hold such large meaning. "I have nothing to give you in return. You gave me words again, gave me reason to use them." She stood, walked around the fire, sat beside him instead of across. Their shoulders touched. Such a simple contact, but it felt like a door opening. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" she said. "The widow and the widower, the abandoned bride and the caged man. Survivors." Elias corrected. "That's what we are." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, felt him tense, then slowly relax. "Yes," she agreed. "Survivors." He pulled out his knife and a fresh piece of wood. But this time, instead of carving, he handed both to Clara. "Your turn. Show me something." Clara took the tools, felt the wood's weight and grain, closed her eyes and let her fingers find what wanted to emerge. It would be clumsy, imperfect, nothing like Elias's masterworks, but it would be hers, her story, her survival, her small act of creation in a world that had taken so much. She began to carve, and beside her, Elias began to hum some old tune from before, from when there was music in his life. The sound wrapped around them like a blanket, keeping the dark at bay. Tomorrow they would reach Carson Valley. Decisions would need to be made, but tonight they carved and hummed and leaned into each other's warmth. Two people building something new from the fragments of what was lost. The wooden heart sat between them, scarred but whole, catching the firelight like a promise. The mountain turned treacherous without warning. One moment they were navigating a narrow trail above a ravine. The next, the ground was giving way beneath the wagon's left wheel. Clara heard the wood groan, felt the world tilt sideways. "Jump!" Elias roared. She threw herself from the wagon seat as it lurched toward the edge, hit the ground hard, rocks biting through her dress. Behind her, the terrible sound of splintering wood and the mule's frightened braying. Elias had the reins wrapped around his arms, feet braced against a boulder, holding the entire weight of the wagon and terrified animals through sheer will. His face was red with strain, veins standing out on his neck like rope. Clara scrambled up, grabbed the reins with him. Together they pulled, but the wagon kept sliding. "Let it go," she shouted. "It's not worth your life." "Everything we have," he gritted out. "We'll manage." But he wouldn't release the reins. The leather was cutting into his arms, blood seeping through his shirt. The wagon tilted further, one wheel now completely over the edge. Clara made a decision. She pulled her knife and started sawing at the harness, trying to free the mules at least. One strap parted, then another. The first mule broke free, scrambling to safety, but the second was tangled, panicking, making everything worse. The wagon lurched. Elias' feet slipped. "No!" Clara grabbed him around the waist, adding her weight to his, pulling back with everything she had. For a moment that lasted forever. They balanced on the edge of disaster. Clara could hear her heart hammering, feel Elias's muscles trembling with effort, smell the fear sweat of the trapped mule. Then the harness snapped. The mule lurched free just as the wagon went over. Elias and Clara fell backward, landing in a heap as the wagon crashed down the ravine, breaking apart on the rocks below. Their supplies, their food, everything scattered and destroyed. They lay there gasping. Clara realized she was still holding Elias, her arms tight around him. She could feel his heart racing against her chest. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He shook his head, then seemed to realize their position, started to pull away. "Don't," Clara said. "Just give me a moment." He stilled. She pressed her face against his shoulder and tried not to think about how close they'd come to losing everything, including each other. "Your arms," she said finally, pulling back to look. The reins had cut deep. Blood soaked his sleeves. Clara tore strips from her petticoat, wound them around the wounds. Elias watched her face while she worked, something unreadable in his gray eyes. "You should have let go," she said. "You would have starved. I would have survived." "Not the same as living." Their eyes met, held. The moment stretched taut between them until Clara looked away, overwhelmed by the intensity she saw there. They salvaged what they could from the ravine, precious little. Some scattered flour, a dented pot, one blanket caught on a bush. The rifle had survived. Thrown clear, but most of their supplies were gone or ruined. "How far to Carson Valley?" Clara asked. 3 days, maybe 4. "We have food for 1, maybe 2 if we're careful." Elias studied the sky. "Storm coming too." As if to prove his point, the wind picked up, cold and sharp with the promise of snow. September in the mountains, winter came early and without mercy. They traveled until dark, found shelter beneath an overhang of rock. No fire they needed to save their matches. They shared the single blanket, sitting close for warmth. Clara divided their meager food, giving Elias the larger portion. He pushed it back. "You need it." "You're injured." "I'm fine." "Elias." He took her hand, placed it over his heart. She could feel it beating, steady and strong. "I'm fine," he repeated. "Eat." They compromised, sharing equally, though Clara suspected Elias palmed some of his portion back into their supplies when he thought she wasn't looking. The temperature dropped through the night. Clara woke shivering to find Elias had wrapped the blanket entirely around her, while he sat guard with nothing but his coat. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I've survived worse." She opened the blanket. "Share with me, please." He hesitated. Elias, please. He moved closer, let her arrange the blanket around them both. It meant sitting pressed together, her back against his chest, his arms around her for warmth. Clara felt him try to hold himself separate, to minimize contact. Stop being noble, she said. We need each other's heat to survive. He relaxed gradually, his chin coming to rest on top of her head. Clara felt surrounded by him, his warmth, his solid presence, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Tell me something, she said, something good, from before. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Sunday mornings, Margaret would make biscuits. Sarah would try to help, get flour everywhere, in her hair, on the dog. Margaret would laugh and laugh. It sounds perfect. It was. His arms tightened slightly around her. What about you something good? Christmas Eve, 2 years before Mother got sick. It snowed. We had no money for presents, but she made paper angels for the tree. We sang carols until our neighbor banged on the wall. Clara smiled at the memory. We sang louder. Rebel, Elias murmured, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Dawn came gray and cold. Snow had begun to fall, light but steady. They needed to move fast. They pushed hard through the day, the remaining mule struggling with both of them riding. By afternoon, the snow was heavier. The trail disappeared beneath white. We need shelter, Elias said. But there was nothing, just trees and rocks and the relentless snow. Clara's hands were numb, her feet like blocks of ice. She'd stopped shivering, which Elias seemed to find alarming. Stay awake, he kept saying. Clara, stay awake. She tried, but the cold was a living thing, crawling into her bones. The world went soft around the edges. She came back to herself inside a cave, fire crackling, wrapped in the blanket and Elias's coat. Elias was feeding the fire with branches, his shirt steaming as it dried. How? Found this place. Old hunter's cache. He gestured to some rusty tins in the corner. Even some food. The mule. Sheltered outside. He'll make it. Clara tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in her feet. Frostbite, Elias said. Not too bad. I've been warming them slowly. That's when she realized her boots were off, her feet wrapped in torn pieces of his shirt. He'd sacrificed his clothing to save her toes. Elias. Don't argue. Rest. But she saw how he was holding his left arm, the way he favored his right side. You're hurt. Ribs. From yesterday. They'll heal. Let me see. Clara. Let me see. He sighed, lifted his shirt. His left side was purple-black with bruising. Clara gently probed the ribs, felt him tense. Cracked, not broken, she diagnosed, but painful. I've had worse. Stop saying that. She rewrapped his ribs with strips from her dress. You don't have to suffer just because you've suffered before. He caught her hands as she finished. Neither do you. They stayed in the cave 2 days, waiting out the storm, living on melted snow and the ancient canned peaches from the hunter's cache. Elias carved to pass the time small. Practical things now. Buttons to replace the ones Clara had lost. A new handle for the knife. On the second night, fever took him. The infected cuts on his arms, the cracked ribs, the exhaustion, it all crashed down at once. Clara held him through the chills and the burning. He muttered in his delirium Margaret's name. Sarah's. Apologies to ghosts only he could see. Once. He gripped Clara's hand and said clearly, Don't leave. Please don't leave. Never, Clara promised. I'm here. I'm staying. The fever broke near dawn. Elias woke clear-eyed but weak, embarrassed by his vulnerability. You stayed, he said. Where would I go? Clara tried for lightness. You're my guide, remember? But he saw through the deflection. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Thank you. Partners, Clara said. We're partners. We take care of each other. Something shifted in his expression. Partners, he agreed, but the word carried weight, promise, possibility. The storm cleared that afternoon. They could see Carson Valley far below, smoke rising from chimneys, the promise of civilization and safety. We made it, Clara breathed. Almost. Elias stood carefully, still weak but determined. One more push. They loaded what little they had onto the mule. Clara insisted Elias ride his fever had taken too much from him. He protested until she threatened to tie him to the saddle. As they descended toward the valley, Clara walking beside the mule with her hand on Elias's knee to steady him. She realized something. She wasn't going to Carson Valley to find work as a seamstress. She wasn't going anywhere that didn't include the man swaying in the saddle, fighting to stay conscious but still protecting her with his presence. Elias, she said. When we get to town, what then? He was quiet for a moment. Then, together, whatever it is, we do it together. Clara squeezed his knee. Together, she agreed. The sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow to diamonds. Below them, Carson Valley spread out like a promise. They were battered, half frozen, nearly broken. But they were alive. They were together. They were home, even if they didn't have a house yet. The trail turned, and Clara saw the first buildings of the town. She looked up at Elias, found him smiling, actually smiling. What? She asked. We're priceless, he said. Both of us broken, but priceless. Clara laughed, surprising herself with the sound. Yes, she said, we absolutely are. The abandoned farmstead sat 5 miles outside Carson Valley, forgotten by everyone except the bank that held its deed. Clara stood in the doorway of what had once been a home, sunlight streaming through gaps in the roof. Broken glass crunched under her boots. A bird had nested in the chimney. The walls still stood, but barely. It's perfect, she said. Elias looked at her like she'd lost her mind. The bones are good, Clara insisted. Foundation solid? Wells still work, I checked. And look. She walked to the window, pointed at the view. Mountains rising like promises. A creek running silver through the meadow below. It's a ruin, Elias said. It's a beginning. They'd found it by accident, or maybe by fate. The woman at the Carson Valley General Store, Mrs. Hendricks, had mentioned it while Clara bought supplies with the last of their money and the credit Elias's reputation had earned them. Old Pearson place, he died last winter. No family to claim it. Bank owns it now, but they'd probably let it go cheap, though I can't imagine why anyone would want it. Clara had wanted it immediately, with an intensity that surprised her. We have no money, Elias reminded her now, testing the floorboards for rot. We have hands. We have time. Clara turned to him. We have each other. He was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Then he walked to the stone fireplace, ran his scarred hands over the mantel. Solid construction, just neglected. 3 months, he said. It'll take 3 months to make it livable. Then we'd better start. They moved in that day, such as it was. Cleared a corner of the main room, hung a tarp for a makeshift roof. Elias immediately began making lists in his head materials needed, repairs prioritized, what could be salvaged versus what needed replacing. The first week was about clearing, hauling out years of debris, broken furniture, the detritus of abandoned dreams. Clara worked beside him, matching him hour for hour, until her hands were as raw as her heart had been. You don't have to prove anything, Elias said one evening, gently cleaning a cut on her palm. Neither do you. He looked up at her. Maybe I do. Maybe I need to build something instead of... He didn't finish, but Clara understood. Instead of destroying, instead of failing to save. The second week, word spread through Carson Valley. The mountain man and the abandoned bride, trying to resurrect the Pearson place. Some folks laughed. Others made bets on how long they'd last. But Tom Morrison, the blacksmith, showed up one morning with a load of old nails he'd straightened. "Waste not," he said gruffly, and left before they could thank him. Then Mrs. Hendricks arrived with her husband and 2 sons. "Many hands," she said simply, and they spent the day helping patch the roof. "Why?" Clara asked her. "Elias pulled my brother out of a mine cave-in 3 years back. Before his troubles, man saves a life. You don't forget." More people came. Not many, but enough. The minister brought boards from a demolished church pew. A farmer donated a door that didn't quite fit but would do. They worked and shared stories, and slowly the house began to remember what it was supposed to be. Elias worked like a man possessed, dawn to dusk, sometimes by lantern light after. He rebuilt the chimney stone by stone, fashioned shutters from salvaged wood, carved decorative elements into the doorframe, vines and flowers and birds in flight. "It doesn't need to be fancy," Clara said. "Your house should be beautiful," he replied, then colored at the possessive pronoun. "Our house," Clara corrected softly. He smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. "Our house." At night, they sat by their rebuilt fireplace, planning. Clara sketched rooms on precious paper while Elias carved small models of furniture they'd build. A table, chairs, a bed frame. He'd started that one several times, never satisfied with the design. The 3rd week of October, the first snow dusted the mountains. They still had walls to repair, gaps to fill. Clara watched Elias work himself to exhaustion, trying to beat winter. "You're going to kill yourself," she said, bringing him coffee. "We need shelter before the real snow comes. We need you alive more than we need perfect walls." He set down his hammer, looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "I can't fail again. Clara, not this time. Not you." She set down the coffee, took his face in her hands. "You haven't failed anyone. You're the strongest, kindest, most determined man I've ever known. And if this house never gets finished, if we spend the winter in a tent, I'll still choose this. Choose you." He covered her hands with his. "Clara." "I love you," she said simply. "I didn't come looking for it, didn't expect it, but here it is, like finding water in the desert." He pulled her against him, buried his face in her hair. She felt him shaking not from cold or exhaustion, but from emotion too large for his body to contain. "Say it," she whispered. "It's safe. I'm safe." "I love you," he said, voice breaking. "God help me. I love you more than I thought I could love anything again." They held each other there in their half-built house, surrounded by sawdust and possibility. And Clara felt something settle into place. Not healing that would take years, but the beginning of healing, the decision to try. That night, Elias started a new carving. He worked on it by firelight while Clara dozed against his shoulder. When she woke, he pressed it into her hand. It was a house, their house, but not as it was as it would be. Complete, welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney, and in front, 2 figures standing close together. The detail was too small to make out faces, but Clara knew who they were. "When?" she asked. "Spring," he said. "When the house is truly finished. When I've earned the right to ask." Clara understood. He was asking for time. Time to prove to himself he could build instead of destroy. Time to believe he deserved happiness again. "Spring," she agreed. They worked through autumn with renewed purpose. The house grew stronger daily. Elias added touches Clara hadn't expected: a kitchen shelf specially built for her height, a window seat where she could catch morning light for sewing, carved wildflowers along the porch rail. Clara made it a home, curtains from salvaged fabric, a rag rug by the fireplace. She planted bulbs around the porch, tulips and daffodils that would bloom come spring, acts of faith in a future neither of them had believed in months ago. One evening, Elias brought out his tools and a length of good oak. "What's that for?" Clara asked. "Bed frame," he said, not meeting her eyes. "For your room?" "My room. Until spring, until things are proper." Clara wanted to argue that nothing about their situation had ever been proper, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. This mattered to him. Doing things right this time. "Thank you," she said instead. He built it with the same care he'd shown on the decorative elements. Strong, solid, beautiful. When he finished, he'd carved a single word into the headboard, so small she almost missed it, hope. The minister from Carson Valley came by in November, checking on them before winter set in fully. "Fine work," he said, admiring the house. "You've made something from nothing." "From something broken," Elias corrected. "Still making it." The minister studied them both. "Would you like me to say words, make it official?" Clara felt Elias tense beside her. "Spring," she said. "We're waiting for spring." The minister nodded. "Spring's good for new beginnings." After he left, Elias took Clara's hand, led her to the porch they'd just finished. The sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and rose. "I need you to know," he said. "Spring isn't about the house being finished. It's about me believing I can be the man you deserve." "You already are." "No, but I'm becoming him. Every board I place, every nail I drive, I'm building him too." He touched one of the wooden beads in her braid. "You saved me. Clara, now let me save myself." Clara kissed him then. Soft and sure. A promise. A pledge. A patient love that could wait for spring because it was built to last much longer than a season. That night, the first real snow began to fall. But the house was warm. The roof was sound. And two people who'd thought they'd lost everything had found each other. On the mantel, Elias had carved 4 words, broken but being mended. It was enough. It was everything. The morning Clara woke to find the note. Frost painted the windows in patterns like lace. She'd risen early, as always, to start the fire and coffee. But on the kitchen table sat a piece of paper. Ellis' careful handwriting across it, the first substantial writing she'd ever seen from him. "Gone hunting. Mountain trails. 2 days, maybe 3. Don't wait to live. Just live. E." Clara read it 3 times, her fingers tracing the words. Such a simple message. But she heard everything underneath it. Don't put your life on hold for me. Don't wait by the window. Live, even when I'm not here. Especially then. She folded the paper carefully, placed it in her wooden box of treasures, her mother's handkerchief, the carved heart Elias had given her, the first wooden bead from her braid. The house felt different without him. Not empty, he'd left too much of himself in every board and nail for that. But waiting, like it was holding its breath. Clara refused to hold hers. She walked to Carson Valley that morning, basket on her arm. Mrs. Hendricks had mentioned needing help with a wedding dress for her daughter. Clara had offered her services. "You do fine needlework, Mrs.?" Hendricks asked, examining Clara's stitching. "My mother taught me. She said straight seams were like honest words, they held things together properly." She spent the day working on the dress, adding delicate embroidery to the bodice. Other women came by to watch, then to chat, then to commission their own work. By evening, Clara had 3 orders and the promise of steady income. "You should set up shop," Mrs. Hendricks suggested. "That front room of yours would do nicely." Clara thought of Elias, slowly learning to venture into the world again. Maybe in spring. Always spring, their touchstone, their promise, their hope deferred but not abandoned. That night, she ate alone by the fire, but didn't feel lonely. She could feel Elias in the house around her in the carefully fitted joints, the smooth banister, the way the door closed perfectly without sticking. Love carved into wood and stone. The second day, she planted an indoor herb garden in boxes Elias had built beneath the kitchen window, worked on the wedding dress, wrote a letter to an old friend in Missouri, telling her about the mountains, the house, the man who spoke in Carpenter's poetry. She didn't write about the cage or the grief or the way they'd both been ghosts pretending to be alive. Some truths were too large for letters. That evening, Tom Morrison stopped by with his wife. "Wanted to check you were managing," he said gruffly. "I'm well, thank you. Elias gone long. Hunting. He'll be back." Tom's wife, Mary, studied her. "You're not worried?" "No," Clara said, and meant it. "He needs the mountains sometimes. They're part of who he is." Most women wouldn't understand that. Most women haven't been where I've been. They left her with a pie and an invitation to Sunday dinner. Clara watched them walk away hand in hand, and felt not envy but a quiet satisfaction. She and Elias would have that too, in time, in spring. The third morning, she woke before dawn with a strange certainty. Rose, dressed, made coffee for two. An hour later, she heard his boots on the porch. Elias entered quietly, probably expecting her to be asleep. Instead, he found her at the table, coffee steaming, a plate of biscuits she'd made the night before waiting. "You knew," he said. "I felt it. Here." She placed her hand over her heart. He set down his pack heavy with game and crossed to her, knelt beside her chair, something she'd never seen him do, took her hands in his rough ones. "I went to think," he said, "about spring, about deserving, about whether a man who's done what I've done, failed how I've failed, has the right to ask for happiness." Clara waited, feeling the tremor in his hands. "I found their graves, Margaret and Sarah. First time since, I couldn't before, but I went, told them about you." His voice cracked. Asked their permission, maybe, or forgiveness. "What did you hear?" "Wind, birds, the mountain breathing." He looked up at her. "And then I understood. They're not there. They're not in the ground or the mountains or the past. The only place they still exist is here." He touched his chest. "And here." He touched hers. "In the stories I've told you. In the love that doesn't die just because people do." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "I realized I've been waiting for permission to live again. But the only person who can give that is me." He pulled something from his pocket. A small wooden box, carved with infinite care. "I made this 2 months ago. Been carrying it ever since." Inside was a ring. Not gold or silver, but carved from a piece of cherry wood, polished until it gleamed. Inlaid around it were tiny pieces of turquoise he must have found in the mountains, creating a pattern like stars. "It's not traditional," he said. "Neither are we." "Clara Bennett, will you?" "Yes. I haven't asked yet." "Ask." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his entire face. "Will you marry me, not in spring, not when I'm perfect, not when the house is completely finished, but now, as I am, as we are?" "Yes," Clara said again. "Yes to now. Yes to imperfect. Yes to us." He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, of course it did. Elias had been studying her hands for months, memorizing every line and curve as he taught her to carve. He stood, pulled her up with him, kissed her with all the careful passion of a man who'd thought he'd forgotten how to feel. Clara kissed him back, pouring into it all the patience and faith and love she'd been storing up like winter provisions. When they broke apart, both breathless, Elias said, "Today." "Today. The minister will understand, or he won't. Either way, we'll be married." They went to Carson Valley that afternoon. The minister was surprised, but not disapproving. Mrs. Hendricks served as witness, Tom Morrison as best man. Clara wore her good dress, the black one, faded to twilight, that she'd arrived in. It seemed fitting, from morning to morning, from grief to joy. The ceremony was simple. 5 minutes of words that changed everything and nothing. They'd been married in their hearts since the moment Clara traded her mother's ring for Elias's freedom. This was just the world catching up to what they already knew. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said. Elias cupped Clara's face in his scarred hands, kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. The witnesses applauded. Mrs. Hendricks wiped her eyes. They walked home as the sun set, hand in hand. Wedding rings catching the light is a simple band Clara had bought with her first earnings from sewing. Hers, the wooden wonder he'd created. "No honeymoon," Elias said apologetically. "This whole life is our honeymoon," Clara replied. That night, for the first time, they shared the bed Elias had built, came together like two halves of something broken made whole. Clara traced his scars in the moonlight, kissed each one. Elias unpinned her hair, letting it fall like water through his fingers, all the wooden beads he'd carved clicking softly. "I love you," he said against her skin. "I love you, I love you, I love you," like he was making up for all the months he couldn't say it. "I know," Clara whispered back. "I've always known." Later, as they lay entwined, Elias said, "I'll never be who I was before." "Good," Clara said. "I didn't fall in love with who you were before. I fell in love with who you are now, who you're becoming." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I want to live, Clara, really live. Not just survive or endure or get through days. I want to build furniture and sell it in town. I want to plant a garden. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here. I want children someday. When we're ready, I want to become an old man beside you. Then that's what we'll do." Simple as that. Simple as that. He laughed, actually laughed. Not long or loud, but real. The sound filled the darkness like light. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside their house, their home, two people who'd been caged by grief had finally set themselves free. Not by forgetting the past, but by choosing a future. On the bedside table sat the note Elias had left. "Don't wait to live. Just live." Clara smiled in the darkness. They were, finally, fully, freely. They were. The wooden ring on her finger was warm as skin, strong as promises, beautiful as hope carved from patient hands and a healing heart. They'd waited long enough, life real messy. Glorious life was happening now. Spring came to the valley like a promise kept. Clara stood on the porch, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. The daffodils she'd planted were blooming, bright as hope against the weathered wood. Inside, she could hear Elias working the steady rhythm of his plane shaping wood, punctuated by his low humming. 6 months married, the house complete enough, though Elias kept finding small improvements to make. His furniture had begun selling in Carson Valley, tables and chairs and cradles built with the same careful attention he'd given to rebuilding himself. "You'll wear a hole in the floor, staring like that," Elias said, joining her on the porch. "Just thinking about how I came here to marry a stranger who didn't exist, and found you instead." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin resting on her head. "Disappointed. Devastated," she said dryly, leaning back into his warmth. They stood together watching the day wake up. Below, their small herd of goats, a wedding gift from the town, grazed in the meadow. The garden Elias had helped her plant was showing green shoots, everything growing, reaching toward the sun. "I have something for you," Elias said. "Another carving?" "No, well, yes, but different." He led her inside to his workshop, pointed to something covered with a cloth. Clara pulled the fabric away and gasped. It was a cradle. Not just any cradle, a masterpiece, carved with scenes from their journey, mountains and wagons, campfires and stars, their story told in wood. "Elias," she breathed. "It's early, I know, but I wanted to be ready. When the time comes." Clara turned to him, took his face in her hands. "The time has come." He went very still. Clara. Late summer. I think maybe early fall. He pulled her against him, held her like she was made of spun glass. She felt him trembling. "You're happy?" she asked. "Happy." He tested the word. "That's too small. I'm full, like my chest might crack from holding it all." "Don't crack. I need you whole." "Whole," he repeated. "Yes, finally." That afternoon, folks from Carson Valley arrived unexpectedly. Tom Morrison, Mrs. Hendricks, the minister, others who'd become friends. They carried food, tools, lumber, barn raising. Tom announced, "Can't have a proper farm without a barn." Clara looked at Elias, saw his throat working. These people who'd once feared him, now coming to help build their future. They worked until sunset, the barn skeleton rising against the sky. Stories were shared, jokes told, memories made. Clara moved among them with water and food. Watching Elias work alongside the other men, accepted, included, belonging. "He's different," Mrs. Hendricks observed. "Still quiet, but the darkness has lifted." "We lifted it together," Clara said. "That's the only way it works." As the sun set, someone brought out a fiddle. Music filled the half-built barn. Couples began dancing on the packed earth floor. Elias hung back until Clara pulled him forward. "I don't dance," he protested. "You didn't talk either, or laugh, or love, but look at you now." He let her lead him into a simple waltz. He was clumsy at first, self-conscious. Then the music caught him, or maybe Clara's joy did, and he relaxed into the movement. They turned and swayed while their neighbors clapped and the mountains held the echo of happiness. "I love you," Clara said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I love you too," Elias replied, just as clear. Someone whooped, someone else called for a toast. Tom Morrison raised his flask of whiskey. "To second chances," he said. "To choosing each other," Mrs. Hendricks added. "To building from broken," the minister said. Everyone drank, even Clara with her water. The fiddle started up again, livelier this time. The dancing continued until the stars came out, bright as promises in the clear mountain air. Later, after everyone had gone home, Clara and Elias sat in their half-built barn, looking up through the rafters at the sky. "We did it," Clara said. "Did what?" "Escaped. Not just the cage they put you in, or the one grief built around us, all of it. We're free." Elias pulled something from his pocket, another carved bead for her braid. But this one was different, a tiny barn with people dancing inside, visible through the open doors. "So we remember," he said, threading it into her hair with the others. Clara touched the beads dozens now, each marking a moment, a memory, a small victory over despair. Her hair had become their diary, their love story told in wood and braiding. "Read it to me," she said. Elias touched each bead in turn. "Fear, hope, first fire together, first laugh, the wooden heart, the day you said you loved me, our wedding, tonight." He paused at the newest edition. "Joy. What about the empty spaces, the beads yet to come? Those are for tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after." They walked back to the house, hand in hand. Elias had added a sign above the door last week, "The Cole Home Rebuilt 1876. But Clara knew the real rebuilding wasn't about wood and nails. It was about two people choosing to heal, choosing each other, choosing life despite everything that had tried to teach them otherwise. Inside, the carved cradle waited by the fireplace. The bed Elias had built stood in their room. The kitchen smelled of bread and coffee and home. Everything simple, handmade, imperfect, precious. "Do you miss it?" Clara asked as they prepared for bed. "Your old life, who you were." Elias considered. "I miss them, Margaret and Sarah. Always will. But the life itself." He shook his head. That man was sleeping even before the fire, going through motions. You woke me up. Clara brought me back to life. We brought each other back. Yes, he agreed. We did. That night, Clara dreamed of the future. Children with Elias's gray eyes and her stubborn chin. The barn full of animals, the house full of laughter. Years stretching ahead like the mountain trails they'd traveled, sometimes steep, sometimes treacherous, but always forward, always together. She woke to find Elias watching her, his face soft in the pre-dawn light. What? She asked. Just memorizing this moment, you, us. Want to carry it forever. You don't need to memorize. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I. They rose together to face the new day. Elias went to his workshop. Clara to her sewing. The sounds of their labor filled the house, hammer and needle, building and mending, creating something lasting from the pieces life had left them. At noon, Elias called her outside. He'd hung a swing from the oak tree, the one that had survived whatever tragedy had befallen the original farm. For the children, he said, when they come. Clara sat on it, let him push her gently. The mountains spread before them, the valley below, their whole world contained in this view. Tell me, she said, are you happy? Elias stopped the swing, came around to face her. His scarred hands framed her face, his gray eyes clear as mountain water. I'm home, he said simply. With you. I'm home. The swing moved slightly in the breeze. Somewhere, a bird sang. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth, calling seeds to grow, calling life from what had seemed dead. Clara thought of that cage in Coyote Ridge. How long ago it seemed now. She'd traded her mother's ring for a stranger's freedom, not knowing she was purchasing her own as well. The best trades were like that, both sides winning more than they'd known they were bargaining for. Elias. We're priceless. Both of us. He smiled. That beautiful, rare smile that she was seeing more often now. Priceless. He agreed. The mountains stood witness to their small happiness, two people who'd been broken, who'd found each other in the breaking, who'd chosen to build something new from the pieces. Not perfect, but whole. Not unscarred, but healed enough. Healed enough to love, to hope, to plant gardens and raise barns and fill cradles. Healed enough to live. The swing creaked gently. The sun shone. And in a house built by scarred hands and patient love, two hearts beat in rhythm with the eternal pulse of the mountains, saying with every beat we survived, we chose each other. We are home. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Elias's journey. Your stories and reflections make our community richer.